not for your pity. We not ask for clarity, for charity. We ask simply that you act in your own enlightened self-interest. The security and prosperity of all of us in the region, the hemisphere, and the world are interconnected. Even if we do not agree on the causes, as I have previously said to this assembly, our lived reality is that our storms and hurricanes are your fires and floods. If the Bahamas were to collapse because of the disproportionate risk we face from climate change, economic vulnerabilities, and external geopolitical pressures, the world would lose one of the more best tourist destinations on this planet. We ask for nothing more than what we all want: the right to live in peace and security and in the pursuit of happiness. But most of all, just let us live. Just give us the right to live. Thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister and Minister for Finance of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Dickon Mitchell, Prime Minister and Minister for Infrastructure and Physical Development, Public Utilities, Civil Aviation and Transportation, and Minister for National Security, Home Affairs, Public Administration, Information and Disaster Management of Grenada. I request the protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Madam President, members of the Assembly, Excellencies, colleagues, and friends. It is my honor to address this Assembly on behalf of Grenada and as a member of the Caribbean Community CARICOM. Madam President, I extend my heartfelt congratulations on your election as President of the 80th session of the United Nations General Assembly. We look forward to working with you under the guiding theme of Better Together, and to supporting your efforts in advancing peace, sustainable development, and inclusive reform within the United Nations. We meet today in a time of paradox. The headlines tell us of division, instability, and conflict. Yet, never have human beings had such access to innovation, creativity, and opportunity. In one corner of the world, classrooms are reduced to rubble. In another, laboratories create breakthrough in science and technology that can transform our future. A paradox. In one hemisphere, children walk miles to fetch water from school. In another, children are using artificial intelligence in their lessons. A further paradox. The paradox defines our era. Progress and peril, innovation and instability, hope and hardship coexisting side by side. And so, Madam President, my remarks today are centered on the one force powerful enough to bind these contradictions together. The only force that can turn innovation into inclusion and conflict into cooperation. That force is education. That is a simple yet profound truth. Education is the single greatest social, economic, and creative equalizer that we possess. It transforms circumstances into possibility. It turns the child of a laborer into a leader, the daughter of a seamstress into a scientist, the son of a fisherman into an innovator. This is the heart of my message. Education is not a narrow path to employment. It is a broad road to resilience, to innovation, and to peace. And Madam President, it saves people, not just from economic poverty, but from the poverty of diminished possibility. And so education is a lifeline. I have seen this. I have lived this. And now I am privileged to lead this in and for my country. For me, education was a bridge from limitation to possibility. It was education that carried me from a small hillside village in St. David, Grenada, where my family fetched water from a public standpipe, to this assembly hall today. It was not wealth that brought me here. It was not privilege that brought me here. It was access. Access to teachers who believed in me. Access to opportunities that were modest but life-changing. Access to the chance to learn, even when the path was uncertain. But my story is not unique. It is echoed in the resilience of the Caribbean families who sacrifice for the children's schooling, in the ingenuity of students who make the most of scarce access and even scarcer resources, and in the determination of communities that rebuild schools year after year after every hurricane. That is the shared story of CARICOM, a story of people who learn to adapt, to innovate, and to persist, always with education as our anchor. And yet today, we must admit that the definition of education itself is changing. Education can no longer be defined solely by university lecture halls or college campuses. Around the world, young people are shaping their futures in new ways through technical training, vocational education, and digital skills. A certificate in coding can be as powerful as a law degree. A credential in renewable energy can open doors as wide as a medical license. A diploma in advanced manufacturing can transform not only an individual's life or future, but the economic trajectory of an entire community. This broader vision of education is the reality we are embracing in Grenada and across the Caribbean. In Grenada, we have embarked on transformative reforms to strengthen our education system and expand opportunities for all students at all levels. We have established universal secondary education and passed legislation to raise the mandatory school age to 18, ensuring that more of our young people remain engaged in formal education. Not as charity, but as a matter of justice and national survival. We have modernized school curricula to prepare our students for the future. Coding and technology clubs are now part of the school environment, and all students leaving primary school are assessed through electronic testing, prioritizing both digital literacy and problem-solving schools. We have placed student well-being at the heart of our reforms, hiring counselors, school feeding officers, and attendance officers to strengthen support for student mental health, nutrition, and engagement. We have also expanded our special education department and increased the number of early childhood officers, ensuring greater support for students with diverse learning needs. because in a small island, every child's potential is a national asset. Additionally, and importantly, we have taken bold steps to make education more affordable and inclusive, eliminating school fees at the pre-primary, primary, and secondary levels. Free tuition is now also available at our two main technical and vocational institutions, widening access to post-secondary training and future skills development. Across the Caribbean community, we are investing in skills for the new economy, such as digital literacy, renewable energy, climate adaptation, and advanced technologies. In the case of advanced technologies, we are considering the teaching, understanding, and use of AI and AI-related skills to enhance education access, delivery, and outcome, as we understand that the jobs of tomorrow cannot be met with the skills of yesterday. And through the Caribbean Future Skills Fund, conceived with the Cooperative Republic of Guyana, we are pioneering an endowment model for education, where international contributions are matched by local investment. This ensures that our young people gain not just training, but also a sense of ownership and responsibility. It is education with skin in the game from both donors and recipients. This is not education as an abstract ideal. It is education as a lifeline, as resilience, preparing us to withstand the shocks of climate change and economic volatility. It is education as innovation, equipping us through powerful digital tools to turn necessity into opportunity. And it is education as sovereignty, ensuring that our destiny is not dictated by external forces, but shaped by the skills and creativity of our own people. And so when Grenada, Jamaica, or Dominica rebuilds a school after a hurricane, we are not just rebuilding classrooms. We are rebuilding futures. And so we need partnerships. Education thrives when ideas and systems are shared across borders. Partnerships build better schools, yes, but more importantly, they build better citizens of the world. For small states like mine, partnerships bring the reach and the resources we cannot muster alone. They open doors to technologies and opportunities beyond our shores. For larger states, partnership with us offers something equally valuable: lessons in adaptation and creativity, forged on the front lines of hurricanes, pandemics, and economic shocks. Together, these halves create something greater than either could achieve alone: an education system global in vision, but local in impact. And that is why today I call on donor countries, multilateral institutions, and the private sector, not only to fund, but to co-create, not only to give, but to learn. Because education is not charity, it is collaboration. It is investment in the kind of world we wish to leave behind. But yet, there's conflict, instability, and the attack on education. So, Madam President, we must also speak honestly of the shadows that darken our world today. Wars rage, economies falter, communities fracture, and amid this turbulence, it is children who bear the heaviest burden. When a school is reduced to rubble, when a teacher is silenced, when a family is forced to flee in fear, education becomes the first casualty of the conflict. And when education is taken away, it is not only opportunity that dies, but hope itself. We know all too well what follows: ignorance that breeds division, exploitation that preys on vulnerability, extremism that fills the void, and the cycles of despair that pass from one generation to the next. A child deprived of learning today becomes an adult deprived of dignity tomorrow. And a society deprived of educated citizens becomes a society deprived of peace. And so this is why I say to this assembly today, protecting education in times of conflict must be treated as a pillar of peace building. Just as we rush to shelter the displaced and heal the wounded, we must also safeguard classrooms and teachers. Just as we protect hospitals, so too we must protect schools. Because whether that child is in Palestine, in Haiti, in Sudan, or in Ukraine, their right to learn is as sacred as the right to life itself. A child in Grenada, a child in Canada, or a child in Qatar deserve the same opportunity to unlock knowledge, to connect with teachers and peers, and to shape their future. An attack on education is an attack on all. A commitment to education is a promise we make for all. Madam President, today I urge this assembly, regardless of history or grievance, to come to the table in a shared realization that no child's classroom should be traded for a battlefield, and no young mind should be collateral damage of political disputes. From Guyana and Venezuela to Belize and Guatemala, from Haiti's turmoil to the wars in Israel and Palestine, Sudan, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, we see conflicts that have as another casualty the education of children. All children, not the children of one side or another, but all children. And so I repeat, I urge all parties, regardless of history or grievance, to come to the table in a shared realization that no child's classroom should be traded for a battlefield, and no young mind should be collateral damage of political disputes. And so we must appreciate that dialogue is not weakness. It is, in fact, the highest form of courage. It is a choice to preserve learning, to preserve hope, and to preserve the possibility of peace. Grenada knows from experience that education thrives when nations stand in solidarity. Around the world, partners have trained our teachers, opened the doors of their universities, and strengthened our health and education systems. From the Republic of Cuba to the Kingdom of Morocco, from the People's Republic of China to the United Mexican States and beyond. Such partnerships have given thousands of our students opportunities in medicine, engineering, the sciences, and more, often offered in the spirit of friendship and even in times of difficulty. So it is regrettable that at a time when we should be expanding cooperation, restrictive measures and political divisions continue to weaken international collaboration and punish countries like Cuba that have sought to deliver the promise that education holds. Grenada hopes, for the sake of the Cuban people and for the good of our region, that greater steps will be taken towards Cuba's engagement in the economic and social life of our hemisphere. For small island states, every partnership in education and development is a lifeline. We cannot afford to see those lifelines severed by geopolitics. And so, Madam President, that is why I join my Caribbean colleagues in reaffirming our region as a zone of peace. This principle is not simply a diplomatic phrase. It is a pledge to our people, because conflict undermines development, and peace is is the first investment in people. Other courageous champions of education have reminded us that classrooms must be defended even more fiercely than borders. Her Highness Sheikh Mahmouza bint Nasser has echoed the sentiments that in times of war, and I quote, "The right to education should be defended just as we defend the right to food and shelter," unquote. The children of Palestine deserve that right to education. They too deserve the right to a future. Gordon Brown, Rasta Machel, Kalish Satir, and Malaya Yousafzai have carried the same conviction onto the global stage, that protecting learning is protecting humanity's future. Education cannot wait for the end of conflict. It must be safeguarded in spite of it. Governments, international organizations, civil society, and the private sector must become partners in this defense. We must work together to rebuild schools and create systems that are resilient enough to withstand war and disasters. Partnership can be the difference between a child picking up a book and a child picking up a gun, between hope and hopelessness. And so my global call to action, the numbers speak for themselves. Each additional year of schooling raises a person's earnings by an average of 10%. If every child in low-income countries left school with basic reading skills, 171 million people could be lifted out of poverty. If all girls completed secondary school, child marriage would fall by 2/3, and maternal deaths would drop by almost half. And if every adult worldwide had just 2 more years of education, global GDP would grow by trillions of dollars annually. These numbers show that education does not just change the fortunes of individuals, it changes the fortunes of nations. It shapes economies, democracies, and peace itself. But let me be clear. In this era, technology and education without ethics is not enough. We must also teach our young people how to think critically, act ethically, and live responsibly in digital spaces. Education must prepare not only workers for jobs, but also active and responsible citizens. Not only coders of software, but also stewards of truth. Not only innovators of technology, but also guardians of humanity. Because we live in an age where misinformation travels faster than facts, and where algorithms can divide as easily as they can connect. In such a world, education must equip the next generation with the wisdom to discern, the courage to question, and the empathy to choose what is right. So let us imagine then a different world. A world where a child at a standpipe in St. David, Grenada, has the same access to knowledge as a child in New York or Tokyo. A world where a child in the rubble of Port-au-Prince can log on to a digital classroom and continue learning despite the chaos around them. A world where a child in a refugee camp, stateless but not hopeless, can study, dream, and prepare for a future beyond the fences that confine them. That vision is within our reach, but it will not come by chance. It will come by the choices we make here together in this assembly and in the partnership we embrace moving forward. And so in concluding, Madam President, colleagues and friends, education is not only a policy, it is a promise. A promise that no matter the size of a nation, the color of a passport, or the weight of a child's circumstances that the door to opportunity remains open. For Grenada and the Caribbean community, education is the antidote to ignorance, the pathway to resilience, and the seed of innovation. It is how we turn survival into sovereignty. It is how we transform vulnerability into vision. And so I urge this assembly, let us protect our classrooms as fiercely as we protect our borders. Let us value our teachers as highly as we value treaties. And let us treat education not as a privilege for a few, but as a right for all. Because when we safeguard education, we are safeguarding peace. When we democratize knowledge, we democratize hope. And when we give a child, whether in St. David, Grenada, or Port-au-Prince, Haiti, or Gaza, Palestine, or in a refugee camp anywhere, the tools to learn, we give humanity itself the tools to endure. So let us resolve together that no classroom, no student, and no country will be left behind. Let us believe that together, that resilience is not just surviving the storms of our time, but building a world where education ensures we thrive beyond it. Thank you, Madam President.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister and Minister for Infrastructure and Physical Development, Public Utilities, Civil Aviation and Transportation, and Minister for National Security, Home Affairs, Public Administration, Information and Disaster Management of Grenada. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Reem Talba San Emmanuel Wedra Ogo, Prime Minister and Head of Government of Burkina Faso. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Madame la Présidente,
Madam President, Secretary General of the United Nations, Heads of Delegation, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great honor and privilege to address you on behalf of President Captain Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso, Head of State, during this session to convey the voice of the dignified, honest people of Burkina Faso. I would therefore like to convey fraternal greetings to you, to all citizens of the world committed to peace and freedom. Madam President, on behalf of Burkina Faso, I would like warmly to congratulate you upon your election to the presidency of this, the 80th session. Your election bears witness to the trust of the international community in your leadership, your ability to listen to other views, and to dialogue. In Burkina Faso, you will find a sincere, constructive, and committed partner. I would also like to express my gratitude to your predecessor, Mr. Philemon Yang. My gratitude for the high quality and rigor of the work he undertook during the previous session. Madam President, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, Burkina Faso fully aligns itself with the statement delivered on behalf of the Alliance of Sahel States by the Republic of Mali, together with Niger as well. We belong to a community of aspirations in a forum of renaissance and breaking with the past. Secretary General, Burkina Faso would like to pay tribute to the work of the UN system and its partners in this common quest for stability and prosperity. The present meeting, which is being held 80 years after the adoption of the United Nations Charter, is a suitable opportunity for us to take stock candidly of what our organization has achieved. And that is what the topic for this meeting suggests that we do. Better together, 80 years and more for peace, development, and human rights. This is fully relevant in light of our mutual commitment to bring about a world that is more just and to build more effective multilateralism. It is therefore part of this approach that should guide every nation, every sub-regional, regional, and international group. This is the oak anniversary after 80 years that should really lead for us to carry out an introspective assessment of what we have achieved. Rather than being a cause for celebration, this anniversary is in fact akin to looking at an embarrassing fiasco, a collective disappointment, and a structural failure. Because we have to be honest with ourselves, we should humbly recognize that even though globally there have been some achievements, there is rather a negative backdrop as a result of 8 decades of optimism that have been sorely put to the test, 8 decades of disappointment, 8 decades of shattered dreams, 8 decades of failure to meet the moment, in a nutshell. That is unfortunately the bleak picture of a UN that many of our forefathers from 1945, if they were still alive, would have struggled to accept. It is therefore difficult to celebrate given such a mixed backdrop to this anniversary. How can we understand the fact that Africa, the cradle of humanity, and where there are so many conflicts, and which represents more than 1 billion human beings, remains excluded from the Security Council's decision-making bodies? How can we accept the fact that peacekeeping missions, financed to the tunes of billions of dollars, are leaving our countries in the lurch and are leaving behind frustration and suffering rather than tangible results? The causes of this collective failure are well known to all, notably the member states themselves, who, after 8 decades, have, within this General Assembly, devoted their energies to defend noble causes and to propose realistic reforms without being successful in this quest. What can we do if the decisions of the General Assembly, which are not binding, are simply making it irredeemably inaudible and ineffective? Could we expect the Security Council to be more successful when it is tarnished by politicization and when it is powerless as a result of its inconsistencies and ineffective because of its permanent divisions? What is even worse is that this Council, whose role today is misused, the Council is in fact a troublemaker as a result of the tacit, underhand and sometimes active complicity of some of its permanent members, who are themselves major actors and financiers of the crises of our time. That is what the Security Council has become. It has become a pernicious body, which, as a result of the predatory behavior of some of its permanent members, they can decide which country will be on the Council's agenda, in which other country peacekeeping operations can be sent, as if to better legitimize their role. We are therefore powerless in the face of the failure of initiatives which are nevertheless good ideas as a result of the rivalries between states and the unresolved crises that are so numerous, the most emblematic of which is the conflict between Israel and Palestine, which has lasted too long. The sinful inaction of the international community in the face of a lack of trust and the authority of states which have been undermined by terrorists. It is time for an awakening and for bold reforms, without which the Security Council will remain an anachronistic institution and will not be able to meet the moment. Ladies and gentlemen, in a world that is changing rapidly as a result of rapid digital change and the persistence of geopolitical tensions, it is critical that we reconsider our economic development strategies. International trade can no longer be conceived through rigid schemas and imbalanced models that have been imposed upon us. Rather, it should be focused on strengthening economic autonomy, local use of resources, and promoting genuine social justice. It has been recognized today that lasting prosperity involves proactive industrialization policies, maximizing the value of raw materials and creating decent jobs, notably for young people. That is why we urgently need to break with the cycle of dependence on the export of raw materials. This is a model that increases our vulnerability and is a permanent brake on our emergence. In Burkina Faso, presidential initiatives bear witness to this determination to build a productive, inclusive, and resilient economy which can bring new horizons for our citizens. That is why my country reaffirms its commitment to building a fairer multilateral trade system based on international solidarity and making the most of scientific progress, technological advancement, and innovation, which are genuine levers for shared, lasting development. Madam President, like other nations in the Sahel, my country is going through one of the most testing times in its history. For almost a decade now, Burkina Faso has been attacked by terrorists supported by dark forces. These groups are coveting our resources. They are trying to shatter our sovereignty and impose the law of chaos. But rather than resigning ourselves to this fate, we have chosen to stand up with dignity and resistance under the leadership of our President, Captain Ibrahim Traoré. We decided to take our destiny in our own hands by mobilizing our defense and security forces, supported by volunteers for defending the fatherland, who are genuine heroes, by building up the Patriotic Support Fund, which is fueled by our citizens' voluntary contributions and contributions from our diaspora and friends of our country throughout the world. Since 2023, this fund has collected more than 413 billion CFA francs, which is startling proof of the patriotic spirit and unity of our people. By carrying out historic reforms to achieve food sovereignty, to restore our lands, and to relaunch our agricultural production, and to reduce our dependence on imports. These efforts that our determined people have undertaken are now bearing fruit. More than 72% of our territory has been recovered. Thousands of internally displaced people are going back home. Schools are reopening and social services are now resuming. Burkina Faso is thus showing that a united people can overcome even the toughest challenges. Burkina Faso hereby wishes to reaffirm, fully responsibly, that its priorities are non-negotiable and that its choices must be respected more than ever before.
Mesdames et Messieurs,
Ladies and gentlemen, our activities are aligned with the virtues of solidarity and unity. We are deeply convinced that a people brought together around a common ideal can achieve great things. The efforts undertaken by our fellow citizens within the country and in the diaspora, as well as their enthusiastic commitment to the momentum we've created, reaffirm that we've made the right choice, and this under the leadership of Comrade President of Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré. The enthusiasm carried by the Patriotic Support Fund and the presidential initiative Faso Mebo is an excellent illustration of this. Established in 2023 in support of the Action Plan for Stabilization and Development, the Patriotic Support Fund aims to mobilize additional national resources, endogenous resources, so as to build our defense and strategic investment capacity. This fund has secured large-scale backing both within the country and in the diaspora. Madam President, the methodical pursuit of our reforms has meant that today we've made significant headway on economic governance. We have better control over public spending, we've optimized management of the state's human resources, we've streamlined institutional spending, and our debt levels are viable. These efforts can also be seen in a more equitable distribution of our national wealth, ensuring that the vast resources we have in Burkina Faso fully benefit our citizens, benefit our prosperity, instead of flowing to external interests or the representatives thereon within the country. Despite the difficulties inherent in the security and humanitarian crisis, the government has taken action across all sectors of socio-economic development, and this has brought noteworthy successes. Ladies and gentlemen, this is why we are astonished by the condescending stance of certain UN agencies who feel it within their rights to meddle in our national debate using biased narratives which are divorced from the reality on the ground. We unequivocally reject the report entitled Children and Armed Conflict in Burkina Faso, which is peppered with counter-truths and the very title of which demonstrates semantic manipulation. I would like to use this opportunity to commend the courage of our combatants and to pay tribute to military and civilian martyrs who honorably gave their lives in defense of our sovereignty. Madam President, we've always stated that terrorism is being used as a pretext, a convenient pretext, for certain states to pillage African resources. Thus, our countries are being confronted with terrorism. These terrorists being the troops of predatory foreign armies. Some states are no longer hiding this fact. They are publicly proclaiming their support provided to these criminals. A case in point is France. The Macron regime's public media, in addition to the daily disinformation it offers, has become a mouthpiece for the communication of these criminals, perpetrators of cowardly, barbaric attacks committed against our peaceable citizens. On this note, we'd like to reiterate our call for a response to be given to the request submitted on the 20th of August 2024 by the member states of the Confederation of Sahel States. This was addressed to the Security Council. To this day, this request has gone unanswered. This ongoing silence further discredits this institution, leaving doubts about its implicit connivance. What's even more concerning is the fact that some members of the Security Council are continuing to trample over Resolution 1373, which is actually binding. This resolution imposes the suppression of terrorism financing, strengthening border controls, and enhanced international cooperation. In the Sahel, we've taken note of this reality. As a result, we've adapted our security arrangements to the reality on the ground, in addition to revising our modalities of cooperation with certain countries. Madam President, we remain convinced that the United Nations should be the framework for dialogue and cooperation. But what we're calling for is a renewed partnership underpinned by mutual respect, equality, and genuine solidarity. Ladies and gentlemen, confronted with common threats and external interference, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger have pooled our forces so as to establish the Confederation of Sahel States. The ASS is not a retreat, it's not a way of turning inwards, not at all. It is us asserting that we have the right to determine what happens to us, to pinpoint our own priorities, and to craft regional cooperation that exclusively serves our people. This choice is a matter of dignity. We are refusing a system whereby our countries were all too often used as a territory for the maneuvering by foreign players in pursuit of foreign agendas. It is our willingness to be the agents of our history, to write ourselves the future our children will live out. The ASS is in keeping with the fight of Pan-African figures such as Thomas Sankara, Patrice Lumumba, and Kwame Nkrumah. Today, a new generation of leaders is taking up the baton. Firmly convinced, and this conviction brimming with inspiration, the inspiration given by the father of the August 1983 revolution, the idea that only struggle liberates. Madam President, Africa, for 80 years now, has sought to claim its legitimate place on the Security Council. It is high time to deeply reform our organization. Specifically, what we need is to introduce a bold Security Council reform, granting Africa a permanent seat on the Council. We must also improve resource management to make the United Nations more effective, to bring it closer to the people it claims to serve. We must also staunchly address the structural causes of international injustice, whether that be terrorism that's been instrumentalized by some, the embargo on Cuba, sanctions against Venezuela, Russia, Nicaragua, inter alia, and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the impasse that surrounds it. There's also the role to be played by China in our future. There is also the specific case of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. We'd like to reiterate our unswerving support to the Venezuelan people, which for decades has suffered campaigns of isolation, illegal sanctions, and constant provocations. Faced with this flagrant interference in the sovereign affairs of this nation and this economic attack, which has disastrous humanitarian consequences, we'd like to express our solidarity with this country, Venezuela. Venezuela, which is resisting with dignity so as to maintain its right to craft its own destiny, free from ultimatums and foreign diktats. We appeal to reason and to diplomacy to end all hostile actions directed against Venezuela. Mr. Secretary General, I would now like to address you. It is high time for our organization to change paradigms, because today the United Nations finds itself in the same situation as the defunct League of Nations. The UN isn't able to make its voice heard, to ensure that its own principles are upheld. It's not capable of ensuring compliance with its decisions and resolutions by the powers that be. It's incapable of ensuring respect for international law, of settling many conflicts, or ensuring that it lives up to the task of addressing current challenges. Mr. Secretary General, you have an excellent opportunity to go down in history by shouldering your responsibilities to enact an in-depth transformation of the United Nations, on which so many hopes were pinned when it was established. You have the support of millions of people the world over to turn the organization into a genuine guarantor of peace and security in our world, instead of an instrument of domination in the hands of whoever is currently the mightiest. Despite the various pressure, despite all the power plays, we know that you have the ingenuity to liberate the organization and to ensure it is up to the task of our common ambition. Madam President, turning to development issues, Burkina Faso applauds the holding of the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development. It is our hope that the conclusions drawn in Seville will contribute to the advent of a financial architecture that's more equitable, which respects the sovereignty of states and support genuine transformation of developing countries. In a similar vein, it's absolutely vital to address the factors which serve as a brake on the full implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, which are supposed to enact positive transformation in our world under the auspices of the United Nations. Ladies and gentlemen, 80 years after the penning of the UN Charter, our organization has not fulfilled the hopes pinned on it in 1945, far from it. 80 years on, our world brims with injustice and suffering. There are risks of yet another large-scale conflict. They're becoming increasingly palpable. This is a source of concern for the future. But it is not too late to give new impetus to our common home, the impetus it currently lacks. Burkina Faso, true to its Pan-Africanist heritage, would like to reiterate its faith in renewed, fair and equitable multilateralism. We will resolutely defend our sovereignty and our dignity. However, we will also stretch out our hands to all nations enamored of justice, freedom and solidarity. Long live the United Nations Organization, a reformed organization, a credible organization. Long live the Confederation of Sahel States. Long live Burkina Faso, a dignified, sovereign country standing firmly on our own 2 feet. Motherland or death, we shall prevail. I thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister and Head of Government of Burkina Faso. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Terence Michael Drew, Prime Minister and Minister for Finance, National Security and Immigration, Health and Social Security of St. Kitts and Nevis. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Madam President, Secretary General Antonio Guterres, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, friends of conscience and colleagues in the cause of civilization, and to my fellow Kittitians and Nevisians at home and across the seas, I bring you greetings from our twin island federation, and I bring you a plea that must no longer be deferred. Madam President, for 80 years, this Assembly has been a harbor for hope. From these benches, ideas were born that banished hunger, cured children of diseases, and stitched torn treaties back together. We have reason to honor what has been achieved. Rights extended, ladders out of poverty raised, medicines and measures moved across borders. Yet alongside these triumphs are truths we must not hide. Partial pledges, procrastination, and the persistent practice of putting profit before people. Where progress has been made, too often it has been piecemeal.
Thus, our countries are being confronted
Where promises
with terrorism.
have been given, too often they have been broken. We meet now at a moment
provided to these criminals.
of moral measure. The map of human destiny is not drawn merely by the large or
Case
the
in
loud,
point is France.
but by the just
The Macron
and the
regime's
judicious.
public.
Diplomacy that is polite but passive
Hell, we've
is
taken
not
note
enough.
of this reality.
Language
As a
must
result,
be matched
we've adapted
by
our
labor.
security
Pledges must be partnered
arrangements
by payment,
to the
and rhetoric
reality on the ground,
must be
in addition
redeemed
to revising
by
our
results.
modalities
St.
of
Kitts and
cooperation with
Nevis
certain
stands ready
countries. Madam
to
President,
work, to partner, and to perform. But we ask for the great actors in this global drama a simple thing, and that is to transform your capacity into compassion, change the calculus of comfort for the calculus of climate justice. Madam President, we are people who measure time not by years alone, but by storms. Imagine, for example, an elder fisherman, hands like weathered rope, watching the reef that used to cradle his nets die away until there is nothing left to catch but mere memories. Imagine classrooms without roofs and homes without running water. These are not metaphors for us. These are our fears at the turn of every hurricane season. The climate science is stern and the signs are severe. Heat that hangs like a heavy blanket smothers harvests and hardens the soil. Seas that swallow beaches where families once played cricket in the sand. storms that arrive more often, that intensify in hours from Category 1 to Category 5, arrive with total fury and leave devastation in their wake. When a single hurricane can steal away years of a nation's GDP in a single night, the ledger of gross national income becomes a misleading measure of our well-being. This is the anatomy of an injustice. The emissions that warm the planet are poured by the many into an atmosphere owned by no one and paid for most daily by the few, by our large ocean states. What was forged by centuries of industrial development now returns as tempest and trial to those least responsible. That is not merely an accident of geography. It is a failure of stewardship, a moral failing that we must name and a responsibility we must repair. We therefore welcome the ICJ's landmark ruling on the responsibility of states for climate change, and which makes clear that under international law, states have a binding duty to protect our planet from the escalating climate crisis. We must do better. We must cut emissions deeply and quickly, scale finance fairly and urgently, and equip vulnerable nations with the tools to survive and to thrive. I am also pleased to inform that on August 29th of this year, St. Kitts and Nevis ratified the BBNJ Treaty. This is a historic achievement for the ocean and for multilateralism. Madam President, St. Kitts and Nevis has chosen to script a different future for survival and growth, one that speaks to balance of care and of durability. We have launched, therefore, the Sustainable Island State Agenda, known as SISA, a deliberate blueprint that sets our course to 2040. SISA is not a slogan. It is a structured mechanism that places people at the center of progress and entwines sustainability with prosperity. It is guided by 7 fundamental pillars: energy transition, water security, food and nutrition security, sustainable industries, sustainable settlements, circular economy, and health and social protection. Each pillar reinforcing the others like ribs, holding up the body of a nation that intends to continue standing strong. Our path on the SISA is both practical and poetic. We are reimagining energy so that the power that lights our homes does not darken another nation's future. We are investing in water as a right, not as a luxury, by drilling wells, restoring reservoirs, and integrating desalination powered by the sun so that a child need not learn to ration. We are reworking food systems so farmers can feed nations, not just our markets. We are building homes that will shelter hope in the time of storm, hospitals that will heal in the time of shock, and school that will kindle the skills to continue economic diversification. These are not abstract ambitions. They are concrete commitments. A 70,000 gallon per day solar desalination plant already commissioned, and a 2 million gallon desalination plant nearing completion. Geothermal drilling in our sister island of Nevis, supported by multilateral finance to power both our islands and beyond. An ambitious smart homes program, a new smart climate resilient hospital, all expressions of our small nation answers a large challenge. We are taking bold, tangible actions that demonstrate how sustainability can be sewn into the simplest seams of daily life. The SISA vision mobilizes resources, aligns ministries, elevates visibility, and, most importantly, invites society into shared responsibility. It is an audacious plan because audacity is required of small states when the storm approaches. Madam President, distinguished colleagues. Just last week, this Assembly took a vital step toward when the United Nations adopted by consensus a progressive resolution that revitalizes the Commission on the Status of Women. St. Kitts and Nevis was honored to co-facilitate this resolution alongside our island, a natural partner for equity, sustainability, and resilience. St. Kitts and Nevis has made the empowerment, protection, and upliftment of women and girls a cornerstone of our national agenda. Today, our parliament boasts the highest number of female members in our nation's history, and it is led proudly by a woman Speaker of the House. This is not symbolic, it is structural. It is proof that when women lead, nations rise. Our sustainable island state agenda is deeply rooted in gender equality. By empowering women and girls, we are not only advancing fairness, we are reinforcing resilience. For we know this truth: when women are given the tools to thrive, families flourish, communities strengthen, and nations become unshakable. Madam President, the adoption of the Multidimensional Vulnerability Index is a pivotal turning point. The MBI centers vulnerability, not just income, as the criterion for concessional financing. For countries like ours, which may register as high income on the basis of statistical averages, yet can be economically annihilated by a single climatic event. This change is life-saving. Where GDP is a static snapshot, the MVI is a living lens. It sees susceptibility, it weighs shocks, it measures exposure. The MVI can unlock concessional finance for resilience, transform loans into lifelines, and ensure that the reality of risk is not lost in translation. But let us now move from recognition to realization, from the adoption of the MVI to its full institutionalization across the World Bank, across the IMF, across regional development banks. Let us make vulnerability into the architecture, let us bake vulnerability into the architecture of global finance so that resilience is not the exception, but the expectation. Distinguished colleagues, talk of reform must not be timid. The architecture of international finance was largely built in a different century for a different world. That architecture must be remodeled so that it reflects the realities of today. Climate risk, transnational inequality, and the asymmetric impacts that fall upon the smallest and the most exposed. St. Kitts and Nevis affirms its staunch support for the Bridgetown Initiative, where our region's clarion call for financial and climate justice. The Bridgetown Initiative offers a practical, principled platform to alter debt dynamics, to reposition credit flows toward green investments, and to operationalize liquidity instruments that protect the vulnerable. We therefore ask this Assembly and our global partners to help convert initiative into instrument and to shift rhetoric into reflowing capital for resilience. The mission of the United Nations, therefore, peace, development, and human rights, is not advanced by preserving an architecture that perpetuates fragility. Reform is justice. Reform is prudence. Reform is protection and equity. Madam President, I want to acknowledge this deep significance of the recent Africa CARICOM Summit, a historic convening that rekindles bonds severed by the brutality of the transatlantic slave trade and colonization. This diplomatic meet was a profound moment of remembrance, resistance, and reconnection. We gathered as descendants of a common ancestry, forging a shared agenda for reparatory justice, trade, transport, investment, sustainability, peace and security, climate action, and technical cooperation. Our partnership sounds loud, not only a call for financial redress, but for justice. Reparatory justice is not just about giving money.
In addition to the daily disinformation it offers,
wrong. For centuries, our ancestors were forced to work, beaten to work, dehumanized to work for free. Yet when emancipation came, it was not the enslaved who received reparations, but their enslavers. This moral inversion must be corrected. And as part of this broader historical reckoning, I also amplify the call for full exoneration.
In addition to the daily disinformation it offers,
most honorable, Marcus Mosiah Garvey, a global icon, Pan-Africanist, and prophet of liberation. And while we welcome the posthumous pardon granted to him, we continue to petition for his full exoneration. Let us correct this error in the record of justice. So today, we stand not in anger, but in resolve.
In addition to the daily disinformation it offers,
said,
has become a mouthpiece.
The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. With our African brothers and sisters, as a nation and as a region, we will continue to bend that arc toward justice, toward cohesion, and toward a future shaped not by the chains of history, but by the power
communication of these
solidarity.
criminals, perpetrators
Madam President,
of cowardly, barbaric attacks.
Is a phase that I hold dear. Peace is not the absence of noise. Peace is the presence of safety. For those of us in the Caribbean, peace is a practical prerequisite for prosperity. Our zone of peace must be more than a slogan pasted on policy papers. It must be defended by concrete measures, better public health frameworks, stronger interdiction of illicit weapons, greater cooperation on maritime security, investment in community safety and youth empowerment programs, and international support for capacity building in policing and justice systems. We recognize the serious threats posed by drug trafficking and other transnational crimes. These scourges must be addressed through cooperation, dialogue, respect for sovereignty, and the full respect for the principles of international law. Therefore, we continue to call for measures that encourage peace, stability, and mutual respect. These are the only foundations on which lasting security and sustainable development can be built and maintained in our hemisphere. Historically, in our region, disputes have been resolved through dialogue. As such, we encourage dialogue between our two dear friends, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela and the United States of America, to ensure that our region remains a zone of peace. We are not asking for pity or imposition. We are asking, therefore, for partnership, for tools to block the flow of guns and the flow of funds that fuel violence, for initiatives that create opportunities so that young men and women find purpose in productive work rather than perilous pursuits. Partnership, not pity. Prevention, not punishment. And yet, Madam President, partnership alone may not be enough. The time has come to reshape the United Nations itself, to reform its structures so that they reflect the realities of our modern world. the Security Council, the very body charged with maintaining international peace and security, cannot be credible if it excludes representation from the regions most vulnerable to the threats of our time: Africa, Latin America, and small island developing states such as those in the Caribbean. To secure a world of peace, those who suffer the sharpest edges of insecurity must have a seat at the table where peace is forged. Across the globe, conflict continues to wreak havoc. In Gaza, Ukraine, Sudan, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Yemen, and each theater of violence is a theater of human cost. Children displaced, parents bereft, infrastructure destroyed. The pathway to peace is hard and long, but there is no ethical alternative to persistent and constructive diplomacy, to humanitarian corridors that put people above politics, and the courage and will of leaders to commit to a world rooted in peace, justice, and compassion. St. Kitts and Nevis therefore calls for an end to the anguish caused by the horrific genocide that is unfolding in Gaza. We categorically condemn this affront to humanity, for which there must be accountability. We urge for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire for the protection of civilians, of children, of women, of the vulnerable, of the weak. And we also call for the release of hostages and for the restoration of basic necessities and humanitarian access. International law, conscience, and human decency demand no less. Further, the path to lasting peace between the State of Israel and the state, yes, the State of Palestine, one that guarantees human rights, dignity, and security for all, lies in the implementation of a two-state solution. Madam President, distinguished delegates, our region remains incomplete while Haiti suffers. Haiti's struggle is our shame if we do not respond with resolve. The people of Haiti carry within them an extraordinary history of emancipation and courage. Yet that history has been marred by instability, natural disasters, and foreign interventions that have too often deepened dependency and deprivation rather than delivered dignity. St. Kitts and Nevis and the Caribbean community welcome the commitments of partner states, notably the Kenya-led multinational security support mission and the backing of the OAS and other regional actors to help restore security and to assist in rebuilding Haitian institutions. But security is only the first step. We must invest in Haiti's health, education, agriculture, infrastructure, and governance. We must help rebuild markets so that merchants trade rather than flee. We must help rebuild schools so that children learn rather than languish. We must help rebuild hospitals so that mothers are treated rather than traumatized. Haiti must be allowed to write and lead its own restoration story, and the international community must be a steadfast partner, not a script writer. Madam President, the economic, commercial, and financial embargo against Cuba is a relic that continues to wound an entire people and weaken regional solidarity. Year after year, this Assembly has reaffirmed that the embargo is gravely unjust. St. Kitts and Nevis joins the Caribbean community in calling for its end and for Cuba's removal from the list of state sponsors of
A case in point is France. The Macron regime's public media, in addition to the daily disinformation it offers, has become a mouthpiece for the communication of these criminals, perpetrators of cowardly, barbaric attacks.
Our region, one of the most generous states in our region, and our partnership with Cuba will be long-lasting and will always be based on respect for the human rights of people, fully in line with international law. A stronger Cuba, a more sustainable Cuba, will not just improve the well-being of their own citizens, but also the security and sustainability of the entire Caribbean. When islands share storms, we must share solutions.
The theme of this 80th session, Better Together, asks us to imagine a world in which inclusion is operationalized, excluding Taiwan from agencies where it can and must contribute, such as the World Health Organization and the International Civil Aviation Organization, undermines global capacity for collective problem solving. Taiwan's contributions in public health, technology, and disaster response are not partisan. They are practical. To keep a door closed and cooperation in these domains is to take a risk the world cannot afford. Excellencies, the Taiwan Strait is not merely a lane on a map. It is a lifeline of commerce and human connection. We must urge calm, counsel conversation, and choose this diplomacy of dialogue over the dramatics of discord. Travel, trade, and talks are how we protect the livelihoods of ordinary people, whether in Taipei or the twin islands of our federation. Madam President, I speak to our youth, the wonderful youth of this world, those whose futures will be most shaped by what we do here. Your anger at injustice is justified. Your impatience is prophetic. We need your innovation, your indignation, and your insistence on better governance. Give us your ideas, and we will give you the institutions to implement them. Education must therefore be practical and futuristic. Training in renewable technologies, digital skills, sustainable agriculture, for example, are important. In, say, Kitts and Nevis, we have a program for our young people that is called the Aspire Program, meaning achieving success through personal investment, resources, and education. Our national effort to invest in our children's future. In this program, every child between the ages of 5 and 18 gets a grant of $1,000, partly to be deposited as savings and partly to buy shares in local companies. So from very young, they are building their financial future, a gateway, a pathway to end poverty in our country. This is an example of how we seed hope at the roots. In conclusion, Madam President, distinguished colleagues, when we accept the verse that says, "We shall overcome," we must pair it with the refrain, "We shall act." The triumph of the 20th century was not inevitable. It was the product of people who chose courage over comfort. The triumph of this century will be no less possible if we choose it. This assembly has the capacity to imbue policy with compassion, to turn knowledge into kindness, to render solidarity not as sentiment, but as system. Let us be architects of a world where smallness is not a sentence, but a strength, where islands like ours are recognized as laboratories of resilience rather than limit cases of neglect, where being better together means binding ourselves in common cause, common finance, and common care. May we be brave enough to act, willing enough to partner, and wise enough to ensure that when future generations ask, what did we do at this turning point, their answer will not be they hesitated, but the answer must be they not only acted, but they acted together as a human family. Thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister and Minister for Finance, National Security and Immigration, Health and Social Security of St. Kitts and Nevis. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Lamin Zain Ali Mahaman, Prime Minister of the Transition Government and Minister of Economy and Finance of the Republic of Niger. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصلى الله على النبي الكريم. Excellences,
Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, Heads of Delegation, Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor for me to deliver on behalf of the sovereign Nigerian people the greetings and the message of His Excellency Army General Abdurrahman Tiani, President of the Republic of Niger and Head of State. At the outset, Madam President, if I may, I'd like to extend to you our heartfelt congratulations on your election to preside over this 80th session of the United Nations General Assembly. Niger would like to assure you that you have our full support as you fulfill your mission. I also wish to applaud the commitment and leadership of your predecessor who steered the 79th session. Madam President, gentlemen, before getting to the heart of the matter, I would like to say that Niger supports the statement delivered on behalf of the Confederation of Sahel States from this very same rostrum by my brother and friend, His Excellency Abdoulaye Maïga, Prime Minister of Mali, and this yesterday on the 26th of September 2025. He forcefully expressed the aspirations of our alliance and our people, with full respect for our sovereignty, the defense of our interests, and genuine cooperation with all countries enamored of peace and justice. Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to solemnly express the willingness of the sovereign people of Niger through their government, our willingness to maintain friendly, cooperative relations with all governments and peoples enamored of peace and justice, and this with respect for the values and principles set forth by the United Nations Charter, as well as our sovereignty and our interests. And how can it be otherwise when we know that throughout our history, the people of Niger and of the Sahel in general, drawing on their vast social and cultural diversity, always drew on their ancestral values to forge secular bonds and to harmoniously coexist amongst themselves and with their neighbors as well. Among the values which underpin our society, our unity, and our common aspirations, there are a number which stand out: inter-ethnic mixing, kinship with humor, respect for otherness, as well as religious tolerance and solidarity, not to mention peace. Throughout our history, we've strengthened mixing between the Hausa, Zama, Pils, Tuareg, Kanuri, Gumanche, Tubu, Arab, and Buduma people. This mixing meant that we established blood ties and indestructible alliances amongst the people of Niger. Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, as you can clearly see, the Nigerian people, the people of the Sahel, have a long-standing tradition of living together in diversity, solidarity, peace, and cohesion. Across the vast territory of the Sahel, where the climate is often arid, our people understood very quickly that it was necessary to organize, to establish bonds, to cooperate with one another, so as to live in peace and security on this shared territory. These people understood that sticking together, expressing solidarity, is not an option, a way of becoming stronger. It was a precondition for their very survival. And it is for that very reason that we naturally support all initiatives which support international cooperation and solidarity so as to achieve our common objectives, that is peace, development, and the well-being of all. For that same reason, we rise up against all initiatives or any actions which undercut the international community's efforts directed at achieving peace and development. Drawing on these principles, the people of Niger unreservedly condemn the Israeli genocide in Gaza. We unswervingly support the establishment of a sovereign Palestinian state. Much like Niger firmly condemns the Israeli aggression against Iran and Qatar, we also rise up against the trivialization of violence in the DRC, in Sudan, and in the Sahel, while the international community looks on indifferent. And in fact, some elements of the international community, some foreign powers are complicit in what's happening in the African continent. Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, actors directly getting involved in conflicts are not the only ones responsible for the insecurity and uncertainty our world faces today. Niger would also like to denounce the inaction of all those who do have the means to act to promote truth and peace. The silence of those who do have a voice, the indifference of those egoists who stand ready to destabilize entire countries or regions in their own interests, the lack of humanism on the part of those who work in underhand ways to sow death in other countries, and the foolishness of those who betray their motherland and their continent. President, ladies and gentlemen, inaction, indifference, complicit silence, as well as subversive and underhand actions to destabilize the situation, violent disinformation campaigns, information wars. This is the reality that my country and the Confederation of Sahel States, the ASS, are facing as we combat imported terrorism backed by sponsors. Niger, in particular, has been living through this since the 26th of July 2023. That is the date when the sovereign people of Niger decided to take destiny into their own hands. We must grasp the complexity of the tragedy unfurling in the Sahel, the challenges it throws up, the ins and outs. This is necessary to understand not only the game various actors are playing, but also the determination of our people and their governments to fight for victory, to tackle this challenge, regardless of the time and the sacrifice this will require. We will be defending our countries to ensure our survival. We will be defending our territory and our people. Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, the usual narrative states that the situation in the Sahel can be explained away by the fall of the Gaddafi regime in 2011 and the collapse of the Libyan state, which resulted in armed groups being unleashed in our region and large quantities of weapons flowing into that same region. Others might mention the victory of the people of Algeria, a victory over terrorism which they achieved in the 1990s, which as a result pushed the conflict to the Sahel as terrorists found refuge in the Sahara and the Sahel. We must add to that the indisputable fact that as Western powers and armies set up shop in the Sahel countries, in Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso in particular, to supposedly help these countries to combat terrorism, what we actually saw is terrorist phenomena in the region expand and intensify. Furthermore, it is also held up as an indisputable truth that the main leaders of these terrorist movements do not come from the Sahel. It's also necessary to underscore that they have vast logistical means, a specific modus operandi, and exhibit blind, unheard-of violence, which is completely foreign to our geographical and cultural space. Indeed, our countries, throughout our history, have known wars in the name of religion, we've seen rebellions, but we've never seen such bloody, gratuitous, indiscriminate violence on a scale that we're experiencing now. For all of the above reasons, I'm sure you'll agree that this is deliberately imported terrorism that we're facing. Madam President, this is also sponsored terrorism, and this throws up the actual genuine issue of terrorism financing and the destination of all of the resources terrorists have been capturing for over a decade now. How can we understand the fact that terrorists have maintained the war effort over such a long period of time? We must also point out the happy coincidence which saw in Kidal, in Mali, a stronghold for terrorists, liberated in the third trimester of 2023, quarter of 2023, at the same time when the French army was leaving the Niger. The government of Niger, much like those of Mali and Burkina Faso, regularly informed international public opinion of the evidence we've collected, evidence of the involvement of a number of foreign powers in the destabilization of the Alliance of Sahel States and of the support they're providing to terrorists. Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, speaking from this rostrum, I'd like to condemn the self-avowed support of France to terrorism in Sahel and in particular in Niger. Indeed, since French troops were cast out from Niger in 2023, as announced, the government of France has established a subversive, underhand plan to destabilize my country. It involves sending intelligence to, training, funding, and equipping terrorists. Unfortunate attempts to create the conditions for inter-ethnic conflicts in Niger and in the Sahel, a disinformation and misinformation campaign to discredit my country, our institutions, our political leaders, and our army. France has also maintained and fueled ongoing political tensions between my country and some of our neighbors. On top of that, we must mention the economic and financial war, an unprecedented war which betrays France's hateful desire to thwart any and all of our development projects by disincentivizing investment and systematically voting against my country in all international financial institutions, whether that be the African Development Bank, the World Bank, or the IMF. Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, what's happening today in our region, in the Sahel, and specifically in Niger, is the result of a number of factors. First, unpaid colonial debts. These debts must be paid off. Our people never forgot the unheard of violence which characterized the colonial occupation. The infamous Voulet Chanoine mission and other military expeditions which stood out because of all the death and the large-scale torture which they unleashed in Terra, in Junju, in Duchi, in Koni, in Tessawa, and in Zinda, and this in a matter of years. In Zinda, as you know, there were even executions. Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, speaking from this august rostrum, my country, Niger, entreats the world's conscience to point out this hostile force which has, since the 19th century, never laid down its arms and which continues to wage total war against my country. Here is evidence of this. In November 2021, in Terra, Young demonstrators were assassinated by the French army. The threat of military intervention on the part of ECOWAS has been instrumentalized by France. We must call a spade a spade. The abject terrorism behind which France stands, committing vile crimes in the ASS. For instance, those committed in Fambita on the 21st of March 2025. 44 Muslims were executed in cold blood while they were at Friday prayers. This rostrum also gives me an opportunity to pay a tribute and to think about all of the civilians and the soldiers who gave their lives shot down by the enemy. These crimes remind us of those committed by France in Niger, and this ever since 1899. Crimes which remain an open wound on our collective memory. In the name of human rights, I recall the innocent victims of the Central African Mission. I recall cities and villages which were pillaged and set on fire. I recall the carnage in Junju and Lugu. I recall martyr cities, Korenkalgo, where the population was entirely exterminated. In Beni Nkoni, where over 7,000 people were thrown into mass graves. I'm recalling pregnant women eviscerated, their fetuses left for the vultures to claim. I speak on behalf of raped women and hanged little girls. I speak on behalf of men shot dead and members of the resistance decapitated. On behalf of my country, Niger, I solemnly demand that France shoulders its duty of remembrance, to shoulder its duty of remembrance and to recognize its crimes. To recognize its crimes. On this note, General Chani has established a commission of experts, academics, and scientists to study these dark pages in our history and to rewrite the true history of our country, to set the record straight, to speak the truth, to reclaim ownership of our history, and to give back to our great nation its dignity. The pillage of our resources, to the detriment of Nigerians and the environment. Following half a century of exploitation, uranium has brought our people nothing but misery, pollution, rebellion, corruption, and despair, while the French prospered and bolstered their power. All of our aquifers are contaminated. It's unacceptable. Also, since the advent of the National Council for the Safeguard of the Homeland and the decision taken by our government to exercise its sovereignty over its resources, the French government, dismayed, has tried to drag us into endless legal proceedings before it will stop exploiting and selling our minerals. Ladies and gentlemen,
I would like to be clear that rather than breaking our spirit, the struggles we've had to face have only strengthened our determination to fight to the end, to vanquish the terrorists and their sponsors. We can already take pride in some structural achievements that we have seen. What the people of Niger have been successful in since the 26th of July 2023, with the National Council taking power, is to put our country on a new trajectory, which is a source of great hope. Success means casting away from our country the forces that were hampering our sovereignty and were preventing our forces of defense and security from equipping themselves with the means to fulfill their missions. This is something we have to do. Success also means breaking with all of the unfair conventions, treaties, and laws that were not in the interest of Niger. This is a strong sign for all of those who are accustomed to looting Niger, that now our country will defend its interests unashamedly. Success also means reaffirming our sovereignty over our natural resources, which had all too long been plundered by foreign powers. Success also means uniting our people on questions of national interest. Now all the people of Niger are united. They are focused on safeguarding our country's best interests. They've understood that the battle is a collective matter. That is why we have a new motto, Labusani no in Zama, Zanshinkasane in Hoasa, and Hala Ledi Non in Fulfude. This means this is our business and our business alone. Success also means awakening our patriotism, which had all too long been trampled upon by individuals acting in their personal interests. Now, the people of Niger are proud of their fatherland. Success also means sincere support from the people to the government. People are now fully behind our efforts to put our country on the path to development. This also means that Niger can stand on its own 2 feet, can stand up to and vanquish terrorism, can protect its sovereignty, can invest in the country's future, in a nutshell, can live without the so-called foreign assistance, which has so often in the past been used to threaten and humiliate us. Success also means that for the first time in our country's history, decisions affecting Niger and our people are taken in Niger, by the people of Niger, and in the interest of Niger, and nowhere else. That is what has allowed us, in spite of the difficult circumstances that we're all aware of, to take social measures, which are both robust and symbolic, which include lowering the price of petrol and gasoline, reducing the costs of some medical and surgical services, reducing school fees, and making sure that basic goods are affordable. Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, Niger is well on the way to a new model of governance. This approach was built upon in the conference that was held, the national conference held in Niamey from the 15th to the 20th of February this year, which brought together all of the forces of the nation. This led to the adoption of significant recommendations and the drafting of a reform charter for our country. In line with the charter, it also allowed us to progressively establish our institutions, such as the Reform Council, the State Court, the Audit Court, the Commission to Combat Economic, Financial and Fiscal Crimes, the National Communication Unit, and the Authority for Regulation of Public Procurement. Next, in the diplomatic domain, Niger has not just enlarged its diplomatic relations with many countries and redefined consular positions, but has also redefined the framework of cooperation with its partners. This is now based on the absolute respect for our sovereignty, our strategic choices, and the legitimate aspirations of our people. Niger is therefore not isolated, far from it. We're also committed to a vast agricultural program to ensure food self-sufficiency for our hard-working people, by ensuring that we fully use the thousands of hectares of arable land through large-scale irrigation. The head of state has asked for this to be a reality, and now the results that we've achieved are encouraging, 1 year since we've implemented these measures. For the first time in our recent history, the country has not been through a lean period, the period during which generally we had to request support from the international community. Our ambition is for Niger to have food sovereignty. Inshallah, we will no longer need to ask for support to feed our people. Turning to economics, in spite of the iniquitous sanctions imposed on Niger and the economic blockade supported and financed by France, who are trying to hamper our country, we have courageously kept going with our macroeconomic reforms, and this has led in particular to our taming inflation to minus 0.1% at the end of August of this year. And now we plan to see economic growth of some 7% looking in the period 2025-28. In addition, our budget deficit, which was 5.4% of GDP in 2023, will, we hope, be contained to 3% by the end of this year. And significant efforts have been made to improve our debt profile. Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, now when it comes to the issue of human rights, Niger reaffirms its commitment to the international legal instruments to which it is a party. Nevertheless, we condemn the selective approach used in implementing human rights principles by some countries whose only aim is to harm our state's image. I would also like to clearly say that Niger and all of the Confederation of Sahel states, profoundly committed to respecting human dignity and the flourishing of our people, will not take any human rights lectures from any kind of body. Given the security, diplomatic and development challenges, Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger have taken the historic decision to establish a strategic alliance, which is the Confederation of Sahel states. And the speakers from Burkina Faso and Mali have already mentioned this. This is a context in which we coordinate our policies and we are building our future together with our own ideas to ensure that our diplomacy, which works perfectly well, can lead to specific outcomes so that we can meet the aspirations and needs of our peoples. This forum allows us to coordinate policy and to build our future with our own ideas and our own means, based on ancestral values, in a forum which we hope will soon be rid of all forms of threats. In conclusion, I would like to say that Niger is, as a result of its history and geography, facing many challenges. We have to acknowledge that, such as the effects of climate change, droughts, followed by floods, which are making life for our farmers even harder. Many of our young people are still in need, and we're also facing up to the fact that a lot of our wealth has previously been exploited by foreign powers, shamelessly. We also have the scourge of terrorism, financed by Western powers as a result of one-sided agreements. Terrorism has been plunging our towns into sorrow, and people have been deprived of their needs. However, Niger, together with the other two countries of the Confederation, are currently enjoying a renaissance, and we are currently on the road to recovery through the leadership of our three heads of state and our determination to take our destiny into our own hand. The recovery in Niger is not a break with the international community. It rather just reaffirms our sovereignty, our dignity, and our inalienable right to choose our partnerships for the well-being of our children. Our absolute priority, therefore, remains security, the fight against terrorism that we are engaged in. We are doing it ourselves, for our region, and also for the stability of the entire world, because we understand that we have to be self-sufficient. We can't rely on the UN, this powerless UN, which is hampered by the veto of Western powers. The UN has to be reformed. Niger's recovery also means economic progress through the responsible use of our immense, varied natural resources. We have decided that these riches must benefit our people first and foremost. We are committed also to honest governance, and we invite international investors who wish to support us in this. It will be a win-win partnership. We also hold out our hand to all countries in the world who believe in a partnership based on mutual respect, justice, and solidarity. This reform also means ensuring food self-sufficiency in our country. Our government is focusing on agroecology and large-scale irrigation, as I have already said. Being self-sufficient remains the watchword of our head of state. Madam President, we still believe in multilateralism as the way to overcome global challenges. However, this must be reformed. It must be more inclusive, and it must be fairer. Africa must have its full place as it is required in international decision-making bodies, including in the Security Council. The voice of our alliance must be heard when peace in the world is discussed. We have our role to play. We must work together to build a more resilient, a fairer, more equal world. A world in which security is not the privilege of just a few powers, but the right of all countries, be they large or small. A world in which every nation's view counts without any kind of discrimination, and where the voices of the people are heard. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you on behalf of my country, Niger.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister of the Transition Government and Minister of Economy and Finance of the Republic of the Niger. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Sonexay Sifandon, Prime Minister of the Lao People's Democratic Republic. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Madam President, at the outset I would like to extend my warmest congratulations to Her Excellency Annalena Baerbock on her election as President of the 80th session of the United Nations General Assembly. Taking this opportunity, I would like to express my sincere appreciation and would like to offer our full support upon discharging your duties, and also to express my sincere appreciation to His Excellency Philemon Yang for his leadership throughout the 79th session, with significant outcomes achieved in many areas. Madam President, this year marks the 80th anniversary of the founding of the United Nations. This General Assembly being held under the theme Better Together 80 Years and Beyond for Peace, Development and Human Rights is of historical significance as it recalls the shared aspiration of the international community that led to the adoption of the UN Charter in 1945, following the catastrophic destruction of the Second World War. This courageous decision, beyond its historical importance, also reflected the collective determination of all nations in charting out a new direction for safeguarding global peace, anchored in the principles enshrined in the United Nations Charter, including the peaceful settlement of disputes, international cooperation, solidarity, and peaceful coexistence. The Charter established the fundamental principles that have guided all member states in promoting peace and fostering multilateral cooperation over the past 8 decades. Although the world has encountered multifaceted challenges and at times brought us to the brink of destruction, it was through the international community's firm adherence to to multilateralism that we were able to overcome these obstacles through the peaceful settlement of disputes, allowing all humanity to live in peace, stability, and prosperity. These achievements underscore the tangible success of the United Nations in fulfilling its given mandate, with the Charter continuing to serve as our guiding compass. Madam President, today our world continues to encounter interrelated and deeply rooted challenges, leading to heightened geographical tensions and rivalry, widening inequality, combined with the lingering impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. These factors continue to threaten international peace and undermine development progress. In many regions, disputes and armed conflicts continue to persist, inflicting devastating consequences on the people across the globe. Therefore, we must redouble our efforts and exhaust all possible means to collectively address these challenges through dialogue and peaceful settlements, thereby protecting the hard-won gains and preventing further setbacks. In the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. In this context, the Lao PDR supports the UNGA80 initiative proposed by the Secretary General, which fully aligns with the emerging opportunities and pressing needs of time. This initiative reflects the international community's continued commitment and aspiration to strengthen the United Nations in addressing the emerging global challenges. I firmly believe that in our ongoing efforts to reform the United Nations, priority must be given to maintaining peace, which is the most essential foundation for advancing sustainable development, ensuring justice, and preserving human dignity. At the same time, we must strive to further enhance the effectiveness of the UN's working methods and mechanisms through comprehensive and inclusive reforms. Madam President, the Lao PDR attaches great importance to enhancing its partnership with the United Nations. Over the years, our contributions in various areas as a member state reflect the steadfast commitment to promoting the role of the United Nations and upholding the principles enshrined in the UN Charter. The UN Charter provides the fundamental principles to which every member state must adhere to safeguard global peace and create an environment conducive to sustainable development. Over the past 7 decades, cooperation between the Lao PDR and the United Nations has been gradually expanded. With the UN playing an essential role in supporting the country's socio-economic development. In 2025, this year marks the 70th anniversary of the Lao PDR's membership in the United Nations. On this important occasion, as a peace-loving nation, I would like to reaffirm the Lao PDR's firm commitment to the principles and objectives of the United Nations. Madam President, we welcome the successful outcome of the high-level meeting on the peaceful settlement of the question of Palestine and implementation of the two-state solution, which was held in between 28 to 30 July 2025. The adoption of the New York Declaration marks an important milestone for the international community in reaffirming our collective commitment to the pursuit of peace, justice, and shared responsibility. The Lao PDR continues to support the two-state solution, with the state of Palestine and Israel living side by side in peace and security, in accordance with the relevant UN resolutions. The Lao PDR sincerely hopes that the long overdue question of Palestine, which has persisted for decades, will be resolved by peaceful means. On this note, we call on the international community to intensify our efforts to support recovery and reconstruction work for the Palestinian people to return to normalcy. Drawing from our own experience, the Lao PDR believes that the war is never the answer, and the only path towards resolving conflicts is through diplomatic means, mutual understanding, respect for sovereignty, and adherence to the principles of international law. The Lao PDR is of the view that unilateral coercive measures is not only contradicting to the United Nations Charter and international law, but also hinders sustainable development and impose unjust suffering on innocent people. We must therefore redouble our efforts to foster enabling environment for peace and development cooperation among all nations. And in this regard, the Lao PDR once again joins the international community in calling for lifting the economic and financial embargo against the Republic of Cuba, including the removal of Cuba from the list of state sponsors of terrorism, and the elimination of all unilateral coercive measures imposed on sovereign countries. Madam President, the midterm review on the implementation of the 2030 agenda has shown that we continue to face numerous challenges. In this regard, the Lao PDR reaffirms its strong determination to implement the SDGs and welcomes the adoption of the Pact for the Future. The renewed commitments aimed at strengthening multilateral cooperation and advancing the key priorities of the United Nations. For the Lao PDR, the SDGs have been fully integrated into the National Development Agenda. We will continue to attain the SDGs through the implementation of our National Socio-Economic Development Plan, which, with consolidated efforts to enhance resilience and better respond to the current circumstances, including climate and environmental challenges, by applying climate-smart technologies. Likewise, we recognize that enhanced international cooperation, as well as access to new technology, innovation, and financial resources, remains essential for countries in special situations and the most vulnerable groups. Taking into account its specific development needs and unique circumstances, the Lao PDR has therefore adopted the National SDG 18 entitled Lives Safe from Unexploded Ordnance. UXO contamination continues to pose major threats to the livelihood of the Lao people across the country and hinders national development efforts. Taking this opportunity, I call upon the international community to increase its support and assistance in addressing the UXO issue, including through the implementation of the International Convention on Cluster Munition, particularly by supporting the Lao PDR's presidency of the Third Review Conference on the Convention on Cluster Munitions in 2026. We are gratified to note that the Lao PDR continues to meet the thresholds for LDC graduation. To ensure a smooth and sustainable graduation, we are currently implementing the Smooth Transition Strategy. Through close consultations and cooperation among the concerned sectors and development partners, in view of maintaining a positive momentum in the post-graduation period. Despite numerous challenges faced, the Lao PDR remains firmly committed to fostering self-reliant capacity and building resilience in all dimensions, including by putting in place basic economic structures, developing human capital, and enhancing domestic productive capacities, in view of realizing a self-reliant and independent economy. These efforts constitute the key objectives in the preparation process for LDC graduation, in line with the upcoming 10th Five-Year National Socio-Economic Development Plan for 2026-2030. The Lao PDR commends the successful outcomes of the 3rd UN Conference on Landlocked Developing Countries, particularly the adoption of the Awaza Program of Action. The Lao PDR will continue to streamline this program of action into the upcoming National Socio-Economic Development Plan to achieve our national development objective of transforming from a landlocked into a land-linked country. For the Lao PDR, infrastructure development for connectivity has been a top priority. In this connection, notable progress includes the completion of the Lao-China Railway, the development of the Lao-Vietnam International Seaport in Vung Ang, and the railway extension connecting Kham Muon Province in central Lao PDR to Vung Ang Seaport is also in the pipeline, as well as all expansions of the dry ports and multimodal transport service hub. These initiatives have contributed to the efforts to reduce transportation costs and open new routes for regional economic and trade integration. Madam President, climate change and natural disasters, which are occurring more frequently, have had severe impacts on many countries, including the Lao PDR. Therefore, the international community must redouble its efforts to implement the Paris Agreement and strengthen disaster preparedness, climate adaptation, and mitigation, and to reduce the impacts of natural disasters. To ensure sustainable use of natural resources, the Lao PDR has adopted the National Strategy on Climate Change and remains committed to fulfilling its national obligations outlined in its nationally determined contributions. However, adequate financial support, technology transfer, and capacity building remain crucial for effective implementation of the said commitments. In this connection, we call on the international community to fulfill its obligations, particularly by providing $100 billion annually to support global climate action and assist the most vulnerable countries. Another untapped potential for sustainable development lies in digital, scientific, and technological innovation, which can serve as a powerful catalyst for accelerating progress toward attaining the SDGs. The Lao PDR supports the implementation of the Global Digital Compact and underscores the importance of digital access and inclusive governance, aimed at enhancing mutual trust and shared benefits. At the regional level, ASEAN continues to underscore the importance of digital transformation and the application of modern technology to enhance efficiency and strengthen adaptability. At present, ASEAN is accelerating the negotiation process on the Digital Economy Framework Agreement in view of positioning the region as a leading digital economic hub, promoting regional integration, expanding global connectivity, and enhancing the capacity necessary for addressing the emerging challenges of the modern global economy. Madam President, in conclusion, I would like to reaffirm the Lao PDR's commitment to promoting and supporting the United Nations in fulfilling its mandate, particularly by upholding the principles of the UN Charter. I am confident that a strong and effective United Nations not only plays a vital role in maintaining global peace and stability, but also accelerates progress towards achieving the SDGs and ensuring that the benefits are equally shared among all member states. On the occasion of the 80th anniversary of the founding of the United Nations, I am confident that this offers an excellent opportunity for world leaders to discuss and explore all ways and means to safeguard peace and collectively address the challenges facing us today, as well as create a conducive environment in which all humanity can live in peace, security, justice, and prosperity. I thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister of the Lao People's Democratic Republic, the Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Nicole Pashinyan, Prime Minister of the Republic of Armenia. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Dear President, Excellencies, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, the main substance of speeches of all leaders of the Republic of Armenia from this rostrum has been dedicated to the conflict between the Republic of Armenia and the Republic of Azerbaijan. Such were also my speeches from 2018 to 2023. Last year, speaking at the 79th session of the General Assembly, I tried for the first time to speak not about the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan, but about peace. My narrative was very cautious, very uncertain, although at that time already more than 12 kilometers of the Armenia-Azerbaijan interstate border had been demarcated for the first time, and the regulations on the joint activities of the demarcation commissions of the two countries had been signed by the two deputy prime ministers. After my speech, pivotal events have occurred in Armenia-Azerbaijan relations. Firstly, the regulations on the joint activities of the demarcation commissions were ratified in both Armenia and Azerbaijan, receiving the highest legal force. This is the first bilateral international document signed and ratified between Armenia and Azerbaijan. In this document, the 1991 December 21 Alma-Ata Declaration is mentioned as the basic principle of border demarcation between the two countries. I'm referring to the demarcation of the interstate border. Thus, the optimistic processes of the preceding period continued over the past year. In March of this year, Armenia and Azerbaijan were able to agree upon a draft agreement on establishing peace and interstate relations and to conclude the negotiations on the draft with such a positive outcome. In that document, too, the parties, referring to the Alma-Ata Declaration, confirmed their understanding that the borders between the former Soviet Socialist republics of the USSR have become the international borders of the respective independent states, and on this basis, they recognize and respect each other's sovereignty, territorial integrity, inviolability of international borders, and political independence. As you have now seen, the reference to the Alma-Ata Declaration means that both countries recognize that the territory of the Republic of Armenia is identical with the territory of the Armenian Soviet Socialist Republic, and the territory of the Republic of Azerbaijan is identical with the territory of the Azerbaijan Soviet Socialist Republic, and the borders encompassing these territories are inviolable. The aforementioned agreement on the establishment of peace and interstate relations between Armenia and Azerbaijan was initialed on August 8th of this year in the U.S. capital, Washington, D.C., at the White House by the foreign ministers of the two countries, in the presence of the U.S. President, the President of Azerbaijan, and myself. The culmination of the meeting that took place at the White House on August 8 was the declaration that we adopted as a result of the meeting with the President of Azerbaijan, and which was also signed as witness by the U.S. President, Donald Trump. That declaration stated that Armenia and Azerbaijan recognize the need to chart a course for a bright future, not bound by the conflict of the past, consistent with the Charter of the United Nations and the 1991 Almaty Declaration, and that after the conflict that brought immense human suffering, the conditions have finally been created for our nations to fully embark on building good neighborly relations on the basis of the inviolability of international borders and the inadmissibility of the use of force for the acquisition of territory. This reality, which is not and should never be subject to revision, paves the way for closing the chapter of enmity between our two nations. We resolutely reject and exclude any attempt of revenge, now and in the future, reads the declaration. In the same documents, we, the leaders of Armenia and Azerbaijan, reaffirmed the importance of opening communications between our two countries for intrastate, bilateral, and international transportation, for the promotion of peace, stability, and prosperity in the region and its neighborhood on the basis of respect for the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and jurisdiction of the states. These efforts are to include unimpeded connectivity between the main part of the Republic of Azerbaijan and the Nakhchivan Autonomous Republic through the territory of the Republic of Armenia, with reciprocal benefits for international and intrastate connectivity for the Republic of Armenia. It was also noted that the Republic of Armenia will work with the United States of America and mutually determined third parties to set forth a framework for the Trump Route for International Peace and Prosperity, the TRIP Route Connectivity Project in the territory of the Republic of Armenia. We confirmed our determination to pursue efforts in good faith to achieve this goal in the most expeditious manner. Distinguished President, ladies and gentlemen, what does all this mean? All this means, and I am happy to report to the entire international community, that peace has been established between the Republic of Armenia and the Republic of Azerbaijan. Ladies and gentlemen, the role of United States President Donald Trump is decisive in this peace process, whose dedication, consistency, and principledness made possible what seemed to be impossible. This is why we agreed with Azerbaijan's President Ilham Aliyev on our joint decision to nominate President Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize, because we have seen through our own example that President Trump is truly committed to the idea of peace. I would also like to emphasize the role of the peoples, governments, and parliaments of Armenia and Azerbaijan, without whose support, of course, it would have been impossible to reach this point. Peace, thus, is established, but peace is not a vacation. It is work, everyday work. Peace requires daily care, like a newborn baby, to be protected from infections, the cold and the heat, the indifference and the pessimism. Conflict indeed poses far fewer questions before us, and the options for answers in the case of conflict are not many. While peace brings with it questions, new questions, more questions, questions continuously, and peaceful life is about answering those questions with care and not with disdain. Thinking diligently about those questions and formulating the answers in good faith is the institutionalization of peace, which is a continuous necessity and something we ought to deal with every day. In this context, it is extremely important to clarify the fate of persons whose whereabouts are unknown and to address the issue of persons deprived of liberty as a result of the long-standing conflict, which is also part of our daily work agenda. The Trip Route infrastructure project will operate in the territory of the Republic of Armenia with a business model agreed upon in a bilateral US-Armenia format. Consisting of several dozen kilometers of various infrastructures, the Trip Route will have both regional and global significance and impact. By the way, in the context of caring for and nurturing the established peace, it is very important to use a pro-peace, legitimate and agreed-upon narrative when speaking about this project as well. The President of Azerbaijan, with whom we adopted the Washington Declaration, has used the so-called Zangezur corridor expression several times since then, including from this rostrum. Such an expression does not exist in the documents agreed upon in Washington. It has never been in the Armenia-Azerbaijan negotiations or documents. I think it makes sense for my Azerbaijani counterpart to clarify what he means by using that expression, because in the Armenian reality, it is perceived as a territorial claim on Armenia and is associated with conflict narrative. In the documents of August 8, we agreed upon clear content and narrative, and it is not possible to understand casting doubt on commitment to those agreements in any way through the narratives I mentioned and or through other narratives expressed from this rostrum. Such narratives do not increase people's faith in peace, nor do they stem from the atmosphere of peace and the agreements reached at the highest level. At various rostrums, the President of Azerbaijan speaks about the alleged capitulation of Armenia. To be frank, I do not understand, in the presence of such a huge positive content achieved through joint hard efforts, why engage aggressive subtexts that are not connected with objective reality? Doesn't peace bring enough joy and satisfaction? To me, for example, it does. What also brings me joy is the fact that the Republic of Armenia is a democratic state that is developing at an impressive pace, independent, sovereign, and building its own future today, a state that does not harbor or spread hatred towards its neighbors or towards anyone. I call on the international community to take note that the so-called Zangezur corridor and similar narratives do not stem from the agreements reached. They have no connection with the agreements. They have an irritating and negative impact and are perceived as a territorial claim against a sovereign country, despite the agreements reached and declared. But this will not divert us 1 millimeter from the practice of celebrating the peace achieved and implementing the agreements declared. In my speech today, by the way, you will not find even one relevant provision or phrase, the justification for which I could not point to in the written agreements reached between Armenia and Azerbaijan in various formats, or in the documents signed and published in Washington on August 8. I suggest that my Azerbaijani counterpart focus on the prompt and precise implementation of the agreements reached, for which the use of legitimate narratives is essential. And so, under the TRIP route project announced in Washington on August 8, a railway, a highway, pipelines and electricity transmission lines will pass through the territory of Armenia, linking the east to the west. As a result of this agreement, the north will also be linked with the south. The mere geographic enumeration is enough to conclude that this is an accurate reflection of the Crossroads of Peace project, which I had the opportunity to present from this rostrum. The TRIP route infrastructure project stems from the Crossroads of Peace program, about the capacity development of which we signed a bilateral memorandum with President Trump on August 8 in Washington. I consider it necessary to note that, in accordance with the Washington Declaration, the opening of communications between Armenia and Azerbaijan for intrastate, bilateral and international transportation will take place on the basis of respect for the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and jurisdiction of the states. And as I indicated earlier, these efforts will include unimpeded connectivity between the main part of the Republic of Azerbaijan and the Nakhichevan Autonomous Republic through the territory of the Republic of Armenia, with reciprocal benefits for international and intrastate connectivity for the Republic of Armenia. These agreements are a good opportunity for the Republic of Armenia to implement state-of-the-art technologies for border, customs, and other controls, not only on the TRIP route, but also at other border crossings, which will comply with the most advanced modern standards. The opening of the Armenia-Turkey border is important for the TRIP route infrastructure project, meaning the opening of the railway and the highways, with the prospect of developing pipelines, electricity transmission lines, and cables. I am pleased to note that in recent years, an unprecedented positive dialogue has been established between Armenia and Turkey. My meetings with President Erdogan are regular, with a continuously growing level of trust. This is an achievement that I highly value and I'm confident will bring positive results in the foreseeable future, namely the establishment of diplomatic relations between Armenia and Turkey and the full opening of the interstate border. Ladies and gentlemen, in recent years, the geography of diplomatic relations of the Republic of Armenia has been visibly and pleasantly expanding. During the 30 years of independence, the Republic of Armenia did not have diplomatic relations with Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. I am glad to note that now diplomatic relations have been established between our countries and a dialogue is taking place. And the traditional ties of the Republic of Armenia are developing noticeably. Our dialogue and brotherhood with the Islamic Republic of Iran and Georgia are becoming more visible. These relations, along with our relations with Turkey and Azerbaijan, are extremely important for seeing the South Caucasus region as a peaceful, stable, and developing environment. In this sense, I also value the 3+3 format, which is an important platform for us to engage in dialogue with the countries of our region and to develop our traditional dialogue with the Russian Federation, although we always have active contacts with Russia in a bilateral format. We have recently established a strategic partnership with China, and we have active political and trade economic ties with India. A balanced and balancing foreign policy opens up new horizons for us. We are intensifying our relations with Japan, Mongolia, the Middle East, and Central Asian countries. Ladies and gentlemen, in March of this year, the National Assembly of the Republic of Armenia adopted the law on initiating the process of Armenia's accession to the European Union, which is of great importance for our agenda. This law is not only the manifestation of our unprecedented high level of relations with the European Union, but also a direct testament to our commitment to democratic values. Many ask when Armenia will become a member of the European Union and how realistic it is. Firstly, 2 of our 4 neighbors are candidate countries for EU membership. And secondly, the law on starting the process of becoming a member of the European Union is above all an incentive for us to consistently continue the democratic reforms. We want to be institutionally and substantively compliant with the EU standards. Short of such compliance, it is impossible to become an EU member. Therefore, when Armenia objectively complies with the standards of the European Union, from that point on, we will have 2 paths. Either we will be accepted into the EU, or we will not be accepted. If they accept us, fine. If they do not, we will have accomplished a very important task set before us. Armenia will be a country that complies with the advanced, modern standards. Our aspiration to comply with European Union standards is a matter of not geopolitical, but rather democratic choice. Because since the people's nonviolent velvet revolution that took place in Armenia in 2018, we have adopted as a matter of strategy democracy, the rule of law, human rights, and an independent judiciary. In order to make our achievements in the field of democracy more institutional and pro-people, we intend to take the next step in the near future. After receiving the people's mandate once again in the 2026 parliamentary elections, we will initiate a nationwide referendum to adopt a new constitution, as a result of which all branches of government and the legal system established in the country will be organically linked to the constitution maker, that is, with the people, making Armenia's statehood long-lasting and people-centered. Ladies and gentlemen, the year 2026 will be unprecedented in terms of the international engagement of the Republic of Armenia. In May, the Republic of Armenia will host the 8th Summit of the European Political Community, and I cordially invite the heads of state and government of all the member states of the community to participate in this crucial event. This summit is a key platform for European political dialogue, the format of which enables us all to act as a large team connected by shared responsibility for Europe's and global harmony. By the way, it was at the first summit of the European Political Community held in Prague on October 6, 2022, where Armenia and Azerbaijan as a result of a meeting organized by France and the European Union, for the first time agreed to recognize each other's territorial integrity and sovereignty on the basis of the Alma-Ata Declaration. As you see from my text, that agreement has had decisive importance. It is extremely important, and in the matter of reaching these agreements in Prague, I would like to emphasize the special role of French President Emmanuel Macron and his personal efforts. Dear President, Excellencies, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, from October 18 to 30, 2026, Armenia will host the 17th Conference of the Parties to the UN Convention on Biological Diversity, and it is my honor to invite all heads of state and government to participate in that conference in Yerevan. I hope that by then I will have reported at the 81st session of the UN General Assembly that the agreement on peace and the establishment of interstate relations between Armenia and Azerbaijan has been at least signed, the border between Armenia and Turkey has been opened, and the large part of the trip route investment project has been implemented. The Republic of Armenia reaffirms her commitment to the peace agenda and the achieved peace. I am convinced that with close dialogue with Azerbaijan and the support of regional countries and the international community, we will never again deviate from the path of peace. Long live dialogue, long live diplomacy, long live peace. Thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly,